What is the greatest fuck it, I'll do it myself moment in history? U/Hermuinin 6 responded. John Stapp, Air Force doctor who was convinced that more pilots could survive if their seats didn't disintegrate on crash landings. He proved it by strapping himself into a Mythbusters-style rocket sled and not dying. His work led to safer planes and cars. By riding the decelerator sled, Stapp demonstrated that a human can withstand at least 46.2 g in the forward position with adequate harnessing. This is the highest known acceleration voluntarily encountered by a human, set on December 10, 1954. Stapp reached a speed of 632 miles per hour, 1017 kilometers per hour, which broke the land speed record and made him the fastest man on Earth. U/Hero 111 responded. Famous writer Roald Dahl, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the BFG, James and the Giant Peach etc., developed and patented a surgical device to treat children with traumatic brain injuries. Dahl had no medical training, he just did it. Dahl's 4-year-old son was injured in a car accident and developed dangerous pressure on his brain due to swelling. Surgeons installed a shunt in Dahl's son's skull to drain fluid and relieve pressure, but it kept clogging. There was no better solution on the market, so Dahl worked with a toy maker to design a new shunt that drained fluid without clogging. Dahl was able to patent the design and it was subsequently used to treat thousands of children. U/Lugbor responded. The man who invented the automatic switchboards used to require a person to physically move a cable to connect the call, did so because his funeral home wasn't getting any customers. The lady operating the switchboard was the wife of his rival and was redirecting the calls to her husband. Instead of complaining to the phone company, which would have probably gotten her fired if they found sufficient evidence, he took matters into his own hands and made her entire job obsolete. U/Audible Nod responded. Dr. Barry Marshall for infecting himself with H. pylori to prove they were the cause of ulcers. He earned a Nobel Prize for his efforts. Seriously, go watch old TV shows and movies. There's always some guy chugging Pepto or mainlining ulcer medicine because they're 5 minutes past the deadline. Dr. Marshall killed the billion-dollar ulcer medicine industry. U/Viper Bunny responded. The woman who delivered her own baby by C-section. I guess she has several kids and knew the baby was in distress, but her husband was at the bar. So she took a shot of alcohol and delivered the baby. They all lived. Even the husband. U/Polluting responded. North Korea attempted to hack someone who used to do cybersecurity for the Department of Defense in an attempt to steal some of his hacking software. He notified the FBI and after waiting a year for nothing to come of it, he decided to hack into servers and Reuters of North Korea and effectively took down their internet as well as virtually all of their sites for many days. U/Sumyungdud responded. John Walsh's son was abducted from a Sears in 1981 and his decapitated head was found 2 weeks later. The rest of his body was never found. They were never able to pin the murder on anyone. John Walsh got involved in victim advocacy and started America's Most Wanted, helping capture more than 1,000 criminals, some of which were on the FBL's Most Wanted list. It was eventually determined, with minimal evidence, that a serial killer named Otis Toole was Adam's killer. To this day, department stores commonly have a code Adam, named after Walsh's son, to help locate children who were lost or abducted from public spaces. Edit. Adam Walsh was 6 when he was abducted and murdered. U/Electriclariland 91 responded. Wikipedia passage about the US soldier Audie Murphy at the Colmar Pocket in World War II. The Germans scored a direct hit on an M10 tank destroyer, setting it alight, forcing the crew to abandon it. 81, Murphy ordered his men to retreat to positions in the woods, remaining alone at his post, shooting his M1 carbine and directing artillery fire via his field radio while the Germans aimed fire directly at his position. 82, Murphy mounted the abandoned, burning tank destroyer and began firing its .50 caliber machine gun at the advancing Germans, killing a squad crawling through a ditch towards him. 83, for an hour, Murphy stood on the flaming tank destroyer returning German fire from foot soldiers and advancing tanks, killing or wounding 50 Germans. He sustained a leg wound during his stand, and stopped only after he ran out of ammunition. Murphy rejoined his men, disregarding his own injury, and led them back to repel the Germans. He insisted on remaining with his men while his wounds were treated. 81. He was 19 years old when this occurred. U/Swansword responded. English doctor Edward Jenner noticed that milkmaids who had caught cowpox, a close genetic relative of smallpox with significantly reduced virulence, did not seem to catch smallpox when outbreaks would occur. As a result, he hypothesized to other physicians that infection with cowpox could be used to prevent smallpox, but they didn't buy it and essentially laughed him out of the room. Jenner proceeded to infect his gardener's 8-year-old son with cowpox and, after the boy recovered, exposed him to smallpox repeatedly, effectively demonstrating his initial hypothesis to the initially skeptical medical community. Jenner's On the Origin of the Vaccine Inoculation, wherein he published his results, set the foundation for the first smallpox vaccine and, eventually, the eradication of the disease altogether. U/El Toro _74 responded. John von Neumann was one of the greatest mathematicians of all time. However, he kept being frustrated by the physicists never being able to build a properly working computer to do his calculations. So in 1945 he basically said fuck it, just do this, and described the architecture which is basically the foundation of all modern computers, which is referred to as von Neumann architecture. Dude was also part of the Manhattan Project, a pioneer of game theory, and did analyses which preceded the discovery of the structure of DNA. Absolute monster of an intellect. U/DiGiorno responded. Newton inventing calculus. He was trying to solve problems that were unsolvable or very tedious to solve. Instead of trying to solve them with the help of his peers, he simply invented a new branch of mathematics to solve them. And then he basically discarded his invention after he achieved his goal because he moved on to other problems. Later there were rumblings about a new way to solve problems and his like, oh yeah, I did that years ago, it's in some of my journals over there. U/Perk Thrower responded. I've told this story before, but I went to the dentist many years ago to have a rotten tooth pulled. The dentist, who was highly skilled and qualified, numbed me up, grabbed the pliers, attached them to the tooth and pulled. Nothing happened. It didn't help that she was pretty small and simply didn't have the strength to do it. She apologized and said she'd go and get a beefier colleague, but LD have to wait for half an hour since the other dentist was out at lunch. I said fuck that, LD do it myself. So she put the pliers over my tooth. I checked with her about 5 times that it was the correct tooth, and gave it an almighty yank. Finally, out popped the tooth. It turns out the reason it was so recalcitrant was that it had 3 roots instead of just 2. Anyway, I got a discount of £2.50 for doing the job myself. U/Malvania responded. Benedict Arnold. Horatio Gates was useless at the Battle of Saratoga, and the two men hated each other. Halfway through the battle, Gates relieved Arnold of his command. Seeing that the American counterattack was stalled, Arnold rode out and rallied the troops from the front, saving the day and directly leading to the British surrender. In the process, he was shot in his left leg, which was then crushed as his horse was also shot out from under him. When Gates' messenger finally arrived to order him to return back to headquarters, Arnold had to be carried back in a litter. The animosity between Gates and Arnold caused Gates to refuse to acknowledge that Arnold had participated in the battle at all. Gates was more astute politically, and the Continental Congress sided with Gates, which was a major contributory factor in Arnold's later treason. Meanwhile, Gates was given command of the Southern Army, led it to great failure, and was removed. After the war, Arnold allegedly asked what would happen if he returned to the US. He was told they would build a monument to his left leg and hang the rest of him. U/Aeon Meteorite responded. Oh my word, I won't remember names here. The series, Band of Brothers, is based off of true stories told by Illinois vets that were a part of Easy Company. You get to see them tell their story while a recreation of their telling is made into cinematic format. There was one point where there was a planned raid battle of sorts. They had another group they were attacking with on the other side of a small town. The person in charge was supposed to call up the other company, but he ended up panicking and was unable to make the call. One of the soldiers was like, screw it, I do it myself. But no, not by calling them or getting their attention from a distance. This man instead ran toward enemy line, past them, and all the way to the other company and ran all the way back. The thing is, people usually have their guns aimed a distance, they don't expect someone to just wind up right next to them. I can also imagine that the enemy was a bit befuddled seeing this guy. He was untouched and was a hero that day. To see better details about this, read comments and look up Ronald Spires at Foy. The entire series is a flurry of brave individuals who did and dealt with unthinkable things. My favorite recounting is the medic episode. I love that they spent an episode focusing on a medic and how flippin' tough it'd be to be one. Medics often end up being the soldiers that helps the most, but sees the most death of comrades. U/cabbage_islarnd responded. Benedict Arnold was sitting in his tent getting wasted, telling them not to chop off his leg while the Continental Army was getting routed in Saratoga. He said fuck it, I'll do it myself, and got back on his horse pissed drunk with a broken leg and rode to the front lines, rallied the troops, led a charge and won the battle. He was called the hero of Saratoga. Then they stuck him in a desk job, passed him over for promotion because they didn't want two commanders from the same colony and because his leg was messed up. So he plotted to surrender West Point to the British. Fuck that guy, but also yeah, you can kinda see why he might have been upset. And for a while, at least, he was certainly the hero of Saratoga. U/Parmavarian responded. Returning from his campaigns across the Indus River, Alexander the Great was marching towards home, sacking cities along the way, expanding his empire. One of the tribes, the Moli, pulled back into their walled city to concentrate their forces. They were strongly resisting along the walls, but Alexander was in the heart of the battle leading his troops. At one point, Alexander was on the wall, just he and his closest retainers, his shield bearers, and saw an opportunity to enter the city. He jumped from the wall, almost alone amongst the enemy, to press the attack. His troops hadn't advanced as far as he had and weren't able to join him. Seeing his impetuous leap, his men panicked and stormed their ladders so quickly they broke, leaving him alone in an enemy stronghold fighting them off. His troops would eventually join him, but for a time in was Alexander the Great and his shield bearers' backs against a tree holding off the forces of an entire city. U/Nakiva responded. Like the story of the Chinese general who was outnumbered in his castle against the enemy. Instead of properly defending said castle, he open-ended the gates and played the flute atop the wall. The enemy general knew of his famous ambushes, looked at him and decided to withdraw from the castle. Nobody else could pull that off and he did. For some reason I find this absurd strategy hilarious. Genius general, but sadly can't remember his name for the moment. U/Seamfail responded. Leo Major. Major single-handedly captured 93 German soldiers during the Battle of the Scheldt in Zeeland in the southern Netherlands. According to the Ottawa Citizen, Major and his friend, Corporal Wilfried Arsenault, were assigned to determine the fates of a company of recruits that had disappeared after being sent to capture a town. However, as Arsenault fell ill, Major went alone. After finding the company's abandoned equipment and determining they had been captured, Major entered a house to find shelter from the rain and the cold, when he spotted two German soldiers walking along a dike. He captured the first German, used him as bait to capture the other, and brought his captives to their commanding officer. The officer and his company, totaling around 100 men, surrendered, though 3 of the soldiers were killed by Major. In a nearby group of houses, SS troops, witnessing the company surrender, opened fire on them, killing 7 and injuring some others. Major disregarded the enemy fire and continued escorting his prisoners to the Canadian front line, ordering a passing Canadian tank to fire on the SS troops. He marched back to camp with the surviving 93 prisoners. U/Diaglutek responded. A man Witold Pilecki who willingly went to Auschwitz so he could make an underground movement there. He survived and escaped a few years later, and in his rapport from this experience he said he could feel the smell of a forest from about 100 meters, 330 feet, what shows how inhumane this camp was. He then was suspected by communists of collaboration with Nazis and was killed. He could have survived by telling who is also a collaborant, but he refused, saying, "My translation, I lived in a way not to be scared in a moment of death." U/Grumpifazzo responded. When Ukraine, after being invaded by Russia, didn't get any help guaranteed by the Budapest Memorandum and had to beg for every single piece of equipment, which experts told them is too advanced for them and needs years of teaching, but managed to deblockade their capital, Kiev, and other northern towns with not much more than Soviet artillery, a handful of Turkish Bayraktar drones and Javelin Law anti-tank weapons, sunk the Black Sea Fleet's flagship with their own system, learned how to use artillery systems from several different countries, established a no-fly zone over controlled territories, started an offensive that deblockaded Kharkiv and liberated Kherson, sunk almost the entire Russian Black Sea Fleet and hit the Black Sea Fleet command post with 2 hard-to-learn French missiles, learned how to use Western tanks they had to beg for months, learned how to use way to sophisticated modern anti-air systems in weeks to secure their towns from Russian drones and missiles, botched a summer offensive in 2023 because the West still didn't deliver enough of the good shit to pack a punch, almost lost the Eastern Front because of shell shortage because, again, the West couldn't deliver, pegged and begged for planes, finally got the F-16 in 2024 and started an offensive into Russia. Thank you for watching. If you like this video you might enjoy the rest of my content, check it out.